This is the Lei Shen 25-man normal mode encounter from the point of view of a Smitepriest. The pillar we began with was the West Conduit, which provides the ability Bouncing Bolt. This creates swirls of energy on the ground, indicating where one of the bolts will land. If no players intercept the bolt, a large ad will spawn, called Unharnessed Power, and the bolt will continue to bounce and spawn more ads. If one or more players do intercept the bolt, they will share a trivial amount of damage. An intercepted bolt will not bounce and will not produce ads. We allow the first pillar to get to about 80% before moving to the next. No longer next to a pillar, the boss will begin discharging energy again. The longer you are able to tank Lei Shen away from a pillar throughout the fight, the less damage will be dealt by abilities granted by the pillars throughout the fight. The second pillar we took the boss to was the South Conduit, which grants the ability Overcharge. This ability will enlarge and root one raid member. After 6 seconds, this player will emit an electrical nova that will stun and damage any players that it hits. There is a safe zone indicated by a blue ring around the chosen player. Alternatively, you can outrange the ability. If players are hit by the stun, it is a magic effect and can be dispelled. Throughout this first phase, Lei Shen is always able to use the ability Thunderstruck. This hurls an axe at a target location, indicated by a bright blue circle. The entire raid will take damage based on how far away from the circle they are, the farther being better. Being directly in the circle, and often being near it, is a one-shot. The third pillar we use is the East Conduit, which grants the ability Diffusion Chain. This targets a raid member with Chain Lightning, and then creates a small ad, Diffused Lightning, for each time the Chain Lightning jumps. Mitigate this by having your raid spread out. Spawning these ads is not ideal, but is not incredibly punishing at this point. During this phase, Lei Shen uses a tank swap mechanic called Decapitate. This inflicts 4.5 million damage to his target, decreased based on how far away the target is from you. Taunting from far away as this ability becomes active is the best way to mitigate its killing potential. The ability granted by this conduit is Static Shock. It marks a player with an arrow over their head, and after 8 seconds, that player splits a massive amount of raid damage with all nearby players. The boss will also call down Crashing Thunder, which manifests as blue pools that persist for 45 seconds. They deal moderate damage, but are mostly ignorable, just don't stand in them. At 65% health, Lei Shen will run to the center of the room for an intermission, and power up all the conduits for 45 seconds. For these 45 seconds, there is no boss tank, but each of the 4 powers granted by the pillars will become active, and will be cast rapidly for the duration of the intermission. We split our raid into 4 groups, each standing in a different quadrant of the platform. This is mandatory because of the bouncing bolts. If some areas of the platform are unattended, the bolts will bounce and spawn an overwhelming number of large ads. Even 1 or 2 of these ads are often enough to wipe the raid. What this phase boils down to is a frenzy of stacking up for Static Shock and Overcharge, spreading out for Diffusion Chain, and scrambling to stand in the blue swirls of Bouncing Bolt. The damage from Static Shock is very high, and should be mitigated with local cooldowns. At the end of this phase, each pillar is leveled up once automatically. Fortunately, we will also destroy the pillar with the highest combined power and level, electrifying that part of the room, but disabling its abilities. We chose to overload the Bouncing Balls conduit, as it was the most random throughout the intermission. Going into stage 2 of the fight, Lei Shen will lose some of the abilities he had independent of the pillars during the first phase. As far as the pillars go, this phase remains the same. Lei Shen himself gains new abilities. The first is Ball Lightning, which creates a small area of damage around each player and spawns a Ball Lightning ad. These ads jump to new players and deal single target damage every few seconds. We spread out while they spawn, and collapsed to AoE them down, and then spread out again. Lei Shen also gains Lightning Whip, which is a random target cone damage effect that leaves behind an awesome looking lightning bolt on the ground. Just don't stand in or get hit by either of these effects. The third ability gained during this phase is Fusion Slash, which knocks the tank back and increases further damage taken by Fusion Slash. This risks sending your tanks off the edge of the platform if they do not tank Lei Shen facing the center. The blue bar at the bottom of the screen indicates the power level of the current pillar, or power conduit. At full power, the pillar will level up and begin building energy again. The damage done by abilities granted by this pillar are increased both by the level and power of the pillar. As soon as the fight begins, Lei Shen will begin discharging energy, dealing steady damage to every player for the entire fight. The only way to stop this damage is to tank Lei Shen next to one of the pillars, located in each of the 4 corners of the platform. While Lei Shen is next to one of these pillars, it grants him an additional ability, and in return, his discharged energy begins leveling up the pillar. The choice your raid has to make is about balancing this AoE damage against the ability damage, based on your raid's strengths or weaknesses. At 30% health, a second intermission begins, and is almost identical to the first. The only difference is that one of the pillars, and its respective quadrant, are disabled. Send the players that were initially in this quadrant to other groups. Since each of the pillars have leveled up at least once now, the damage that these abilities do is significantly higher. At the end of this intermission, he will again destroy the pillar with the highest level and power, electrifying that part of the room. The 2 remaining pillars, while not destroyed, remain inactive for the rest of the fight anyway. During this final phase, Lei Shen loses the tank knockback Fusion Slash, but reacquires Thunderstruck, the land-targeted, distance-based AoE damage. He will continue casting Lightning Whip and Ball Lightning as in the second main phase. The only new ability for this phase is Violent Gale Winds, which is a push mechanic reminiscent of Lei Shi from Terrace of Endless Spring. This effect deals 15,000 damage every second while active, and risks pushing you into any number of terrible ground effects, or off the edge of the platform. We still handled the Ball Lightning by stacking up after they spawn, and spreading out once they've all been AoE'd. If you survived to this part of the fight with most of your raid up, you are pretty much into a gear check portion of the fight. Your raid no longer has strategic choices to make other than how to cycle healing cooldowns.